Tracy Crum. I'm the director for artistic advancement at the Textile Center. And we are about to start the second in our series of Art Speaks Summer Lunchtime discussions with artists who are participants in our exhibitions here at Textile Center. So I just want to remind everybody that's out there in the audience that Textile Center is open by appointment. We're letting only about 6 people per hour come into the building, but it's bringing in a nice steady flow of traffic to see the exhibitions live and in person. We have 3 great exhibitions up right now. We have the Pride exhibition in the Joan Mondale Gallery. We have the Roots of Our Labor, which is the Jerome Grantees in the Studio Gallery. And we have this super awesome exhibition, Art Cloth Network Full Circle, who are here with us today, and several of the members. And the exhibition is in celebration of their 20th anniversary. So thank you for coming. We have 5 members of the Art Cloth Network: Barbara Schneider, Mary Ellen Latino, Sisson, let's see, Judy Langille. Did I say that right? Langille, okay, and Priscilla Smith, all with us today to answer some questions and talk a little bit about their work and their involvement with Art Cloth Network. And I think further ado, I'm going to just get into some of the questions. And I think the first question is going to ask the artists to talk a little bit about themselves. So this is a great chance for you guys to introduce yourselves to your studio audience and get the conversation rolling. We ask everyone in the audience to please stay muted until the very end. If we can take any live questions, we will, but otherwise we'd like everybody to use the chat feature on Zoom to address your questions. And then our production team, Ray Cordes and Maddie Lay in the back, will handle, they will open up their mics and they will handle forwarding the questions to the group, okay, as we have time. Okay, so the first question I'm going to start with, and I'm going to ask everybody to conversation about this, but I really want to know about the work that's part of the Full Circle exhibition. So just for everybody else out there, I think there are 40 pieces of work in Full Circle. There's a virtual exhibit online of the, it's a beautiful catalog that the Art Cloth Network put together. And so folks can take a look at that online. I'd just like to know about the work that you've included and talk about why you were maybe motivated to make the work. And then, yeah, and maybe we'll talk a little bit later, but maybe just talk specifically about the work that's in the show for starters, and give a little introduction, and because the people in the audience have not read the statements that are in the catalog, right? So all of you wrote a statement, and it'd be great if you can share some of that information. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to start with Judy, because Judy's happens to be up on my screen right now. So Judy, unmute yourself.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Unmute. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, great. So if you don't mind starting with the other image first. Okay. So I'm okay, right? Okay.
Yep.
So first of all, I want to thank Tracy for doing this. This is really a fantastic opportunity for us to talk about our work, and to thank you for doing this whole big show. So when the call, every year we have a call for entry, and this year the theme was Full Circle, and it related to the fact that our organization was 20 years old. And I have been working with quilts and fabric for many, many, many years. And I used to, so to me, the call meant I was inspired by the fact that I used to be a very traditional quilter, doing a lot of piecing. And over the years, I began printing my fabric, all of my own fabric. And I decided to see whether or not I would be able to print these pieced patterns to make them look three-dimensional. So this is a traditional baby block quilt that, you know, one might put together by piecing, only I printed it with dye. And then so this is the first piece I'm talking about. And I then hand stitched it and with French knots. So all of the little dots that you see are French knots. So then as I worked along, I was beginning to work on three-dimensional work. So now you can go to the next slide or the next page. And I began to work three-dimensionally and to see whether I could take some of these still traditional patterns and make them work as pieces that could hang on the wall. So they're basically relief sculptures. And so I really have come full circle from the traditional quilter to trying to make these pieces more and more three-dimensional. So all of this fabric is hand-painted silk, it's machine stitched, and then the constructions are hand sewn together. So that's basically my thing. I think is that enough for now? So
yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
If we can, just the next person, Mary Ellen, I'm going to call on you, if that's okay.
Sure. Hi, all. Thank you once again, Tracy, for having us do this panel today. Basically, my journey with surface design started about 20 years ago following breast cancer treatment. I took a dye class and there was no turning back. And before that, I was a passionate photographer, a hobbyist, but passionate, which I started in college, black and white, darkroom, etc. So with this piece, it's got a dual full circle theme. One was I wanted, which I had already been working with, I wanted to combine both mediums, both photography and surface design, to express my artistic voice through using both mediums. And then the second reason why I decided to come up with this particular theme of the world is because I was reflecting upon the world and all the turbulence in it, and such things as immigration questions, border, just the whole political climate, terrorism. And this is what I created. After the way I work, I create the piece, then it needs to be commercially printed, and then I used a metallic foil afterwards and some paints to enhance the imagery. The thing is, this was done before COVID-19, but it is so apropos for what is happening today with the total international dilemma that we're in. And the world is certainly all watching each other to see how we're able to combat this horrible epidemic and pandemic and to find a vaccine. So that's my story.
Mary Ellen, thank you. And I appreciate from both of you so far hearing a little bit about process and material, because we do have a lot of folks who have joined this session today who are practitioners, and they're always asking a lot of questions about, how did they do this? How did they make this? But I also think that having part of the conversation be geared towards the conceptual, I'm going to call it the conceptual basis of the work, is really, really important, because one of the things that it's important for me as an educator is that people begin to share the reasons behind doing their work. And I just want you to know, Mary Ellen, our staff loved your image. It's the image that we chose. This was many months ago, because originally this exhibition was supposed to open, in April. I can't even remember. It's just the last 6 months has been such a blur. And so we had all of your work here, and it was all in storage, and we had to keep postponing the opening because of COVID-19, and we were able to open our facility again in early July. And it was just really fabulous to be able to unpack all the work and get it out, and to see this image, because we had used it as a thumbnail image and in some of our press materials, and it was just a really, really compelling image. I mean, to me, when I saw it, it's like I saw the detail, and then I saw the overall, and there's sort of like, it reminded me of, sort of the duality, the two faces. It was in a bubble, and I kept thinking of it in somehow inside of a spacesuit. I mean, it just, there were so many layers, and it took me a while to even, I could see the eyes right away, but then I started seeing all these other layers of faces that made such a dense image. It was just, it's one of those images that you can look at and I see something different in it every single time. So appreciate your sharing. So I'm going to shift to Barbara. Barbara, I see you on my screen now. So why don't we have you talk a little bit about the work that you put into the exhibit. And I'm just as a precursor to what you say, I want everybody to know Barbara and I have worked together for the last several years on a number of projects. Barbara first came to us with an exhibition of her work, which we hosted, I don't know, was it 2 years ago?
2 or 3.
3 years ago. Time goes by.
Yeah.
And Barbara came in with her work, and she came in and she did a workshop for us, and the students just loved it. So she came back the next summer and did a week-long workshop in stitching on photographic imagery. And you have been a beloved friend of mine and colleague, and also it's been terrific to work with you on this project over the last year or so. So I just want to welcome you, a special welcome, because you're really the person that made this happen. So
Well, thank you. I think the two of us made a good team trying
yeah.
to wend our way through how to make this happen.
Yeah.
So, well, when I started working on this as a theme, part of it, we chose the 20 by 20 full circle theme because one of our earliest meetings was in Minneapolis at the Textile Center. So that was part of this whole full circleness of it all. But for me, full circle was at this point in my life, kind of looking back at things that have held meaning for me in my work over time. And working on these pieces actually made me think some more about, as my life is growing closer to the end, that to be even more grateful for the wonders and the joys and even the losses and the opportunities that have occurred. So I chose 2 quotes that have stuck with me for a long time, and worked on those 2 quotes for the inspiration for these pieces. So the quote for this one, "No dead ends," came from I got to find it here, from a poem called "Circle of Grace" by Penelope Stokes. And she says, "Life is not a maze, it's a labyrinth. We walk and we keep on walking. And sometimes the path leads us far afield from the center and sometimes very close. When we come to a turn, we're never quite sure which direction the switchback will take us, but we don't have to worry about finding the one right way. We don't have to figure out the answers. In a labyrinth, there are no dead ends. We simply continue on in a path of faith that will bring us to the center." And that really had a whole lot of meaning for me. So I created, 3 or 4 different labyrinth pieces, and that in and of itself was quite a wonderful task to see how many ways could I interpret that. And this one, "No Dead Ends," was one of the pieces chosen. If we can go to the next page, the second quote was from Wendell Berry, and it's called "Closing the Circle." And he talks about within the circle of our lives, we dance the circle of years, the circles of seasons within the circle of years, and so on. It's a longer piece, but this was a hand-stitched piece that I just started in the center, and I just kept adding, varying the threads. And to me, it felt like I was building that quote stitch by stitch, because I was turning the fabric and adding threads and overlapping and intertwining and moving through the dark and the light areas. And I felt like that kind of captured my life, these incremental moments that you live. And you don't often get to sort of step back and see the whole. So that's where these came from. And I'm pretty happy with them. I don't often work small or by hand, so that was well worth doing.
So I'm just as a little bit of backstory to the exhibit. The Art Cloth Network invited me to jury the exhibition, and from the submissions from their members, and so my task was to pick, I think, 40 pieces, because we knew that was a format that was a quantity that would fit in the hallway. And it was really interesting to me to see, well, not only the variation between the artist's work, but the variation within an artist's work. So I remember, Barbara, when I saw your two pieces, I mean, I've associated you for the last few years with these digital images that have all the stitching on top of it. And when I saw this image, I just thought, there's a photographic quality up to it, but it broke things down very, very differently. It was all done by hand. I don't really know if there's a photograph in the back of it, and it doesn't make any difference if
No.
But you were a good example of somebody who had seemed to have like two very sort of almost different bodies of work going on in this, within the theme. And so, a number of the artists in the exhibition have more than one piece. I think 2 is the most. And, there was a challenge for me to really look at the work, to bring forth pieces from artists that I felt would really sort of round out a really sort of broad selection of what's happening in the field, because I also really wanted this exhibition to represent sort of the breadth of what art cloth is. So yeah, anyway, good example, because I love the fact that your 2 pieces, they felt so different. And I think when we opened all the boxes, no one knew whose work was whose, probably except me, because I had seen the work, but it had been so long ago. I don't know if it was I can't even remember when I did this, so just
Back last November.
Yeah, and then for
October,
people here
November.
on our staff and who helped, and Ray Cordes particularly, who's helping with this Zoom session, grouping the work and trying to figure out like what worked together and what resonated, not knowing which artists were who. It was really interesting to see the pairings that people made within the work. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. We'll include some better images online on the virtual exhibit in the coming week. Of the groupings of the work, just so people can see their own work in the context of what everybody else in the group did. I think that'd be
great to see it that way.
Yeah, it'd be a cool thing to add. We're working on it. We're just sort of one step at a time these days. I want to call on Priscilla to speak next, if you would. And I think you're unmuted. No, unmute yourself. There you go. Excellent. So Priscilla Smith, unmute yourself again.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right. So my work is primarily related to social justice and political themes. Most of my work has more realistic images in it, and I think for myself, and being a social justice artist, that I think real themes impact people more than abstract work. So some of the pieces I've done in the past with imagery would be related to sexual violence, discrimination of others, and political work, especially related to current political work. So I often will try to generate a feeling of sadness or discomfort or upset at the issues that I'm trying to talk about. This piece, well, I'm a mother. So following politics and all that's happened with all of the lost children in the last couple of years, I had to do this piece. And after I started thinking about it, I read this story about a mother whose baby was stolen from her at the border. And she was going to spend the next 2 years trying to find the baby. So she called all of the departments in the federal government that she could think of. She talked to everyone she could. She took a lot of trips around the country because she got leads that maybe the baby was there. And after 2 years, she never did find her baby. And she commented in this story that I read that it just felt like she was going around and around and around in circles, trying to find her baby. One of the things that really, really irked me was when she made one of her last calls to the federal government. They said words to the effect of, "Don't worry, there probably aren't more than 3,000 babies lost." So I have actually 2 of the babies are numbered higher than 3,000. So I think that's
Yeah.
what I want to say about this piece.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, yeah, again, like I said, the content behind the work is so, it's just so important. And it seems like the stories these days, you know, we make work. I'm guessing that most of you, since we juried this back in November, a lot of these pieces were made the previous year in preparation for this exhibition. And it's been incredible to me every time I look at your catalog, how relevant the pieces are to current events. There just seems to be such a, I don't know what the right word is. I wanted to say menagerie, and that isn't quite the right context for it, but there just seems to be so much going on that things, you know, we have different ways of thinking about our work because things appear in a new light, and there's just so much going on, I think, with all of your work that ties it to current events. It's really incredible. So I'm going to have Jeanne, you're up next before we switch questions. Good to see you.
Hello.
Jeanne Sisson. Sisson, I'm sorry.
No big deal.
Well, okay, why don't you talk about your...
So our work kind of is a menagerie. You know, we have such a varied group of artists and that come from a lot of different perspectives. So it's interesting to listen to everybody. I mean, we've talked about this work before. I kind of know what everybody, or not that I know what everybody has said, but we've discussed it before, but it's really nice to have the reminder. And I think it is such a varied show. My work tends to be inspired by nature, even though more recently my work is a little more abstract. I often am drawn to, or I find a narrative that leads me to a more nature-inspired thought process around it. So I have trouble, and my group already knows this, I have trouble with themed exhibits or even exhibits with titles. I tend to be rebellious and go, I don't want to do that. But I finally forced myself to do some work. And what helped me was to start making notes about circles and what that led me to. And almost immediately, I went to like the cycle of nature, the seasons, Wiccan kind of imagery, astrology, because I resonate with the circle that way. So this piece is on linen, and it's mono printed or monotyped with thickened dye. That's what the background is. And then I used ink tense pencils to draw the tree imagery all similar and connected at the edges so that each season is a connection and a cycle. And then the lettering, and so the trees are drawn with intense pencils, but then stitched, couched with linen thread. And then the writing all the way around each season, I wrote words that relate to the season, and just, I don't know, random words that I thought fit each season. So that's how I ended up there with this piece. And it is trickier to work in a smaller format. But if you do a lot of stitching, it was actually very helpful. So yeah, that's how I ended up there and what my inspiration is.
Jeannie, I'm going to continue with you because I think you're.
Oh, did I lose somebody? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I saw it looked like
question-
something froze.
Oh,
I didn't know.
the next question that I wanted to ask everybody, and I'm going to stick with Jeannie on this. You talked about rebelling against the, and I'm going to put in quotes, the assignment.
Yeah.
I find it's interesting, when you decide to accept the challenge to address a particular theme in terms of making work for an exhibition, as opposed to just having it be this open-ended part of your studio, whatever happens in the studio. Research often plays a really big part in it because it's a place for people to start, especially when you're setting yourself up for a challenge and it's not necessarily the way you work. So can you talk a little bit maybe about the current direction of your practice, and how did the work that you did for this show have any influence on your practice? Do you feel like it's connected to your practice, or does it really feel like something now in hindsight that's sort of sitting outside of your current direction? Can you just talk a little bit about where you're at, and then how this piece may or may not relate to it?
This piece tends to be, for me, it feels a little older in how I approach stuff, because it did feel a little bit planned. I pre-planned how, I did some drawings and some sketches, and that's really how I've worked for years. I come from an oil painting background, and I always worked in super realistic kind of things before I started using textile as a painting medium, or textile surface design as a painting medium. So it feels for me a little bit older because I did pre-plan it. My work generally now, I start out and I monotype off of plates, and then I let the image, and then I react to that imagery and either print it, and usually print again. And I usually start with thickened dyes and then work my way towards paints, and then sometimes add stitch. But the work starts to speak to me, and then I react to it, which is really new in the last 3 years for me, because it's much more spontaneous, and it also allows for a more abstract approach, which has been very good for me in loosening up. So the work that's in this piece that's in Full Circle is not quite as spontaneous, I think, as my work has been recently.
Can you, and I'm going to have you talk just a little more, because this sort of sets everybody else up for this round of questioning, but do you, as part of your practice, do you identify source material? Do you think about source material in terms of like the structure that I mean, everybody has some kind of a structure, even if it's randomness.
Well, even so, so let's say I've done a few, and I tend to do a number of prints, and I'm working on several pieces at once, especially if you're batching, thickened dye. So when something finally speaks to me, when I start to have a relationship with the piece, then often, if not looking for source material, I'll start writing. And then usually those are triggers. And I often am using, I am using type as, or lettering sometimes as texture. So if I'm doing that, I need to have some reference. I prefer to use my own words or my own poetry if I'm writing or using text as a texture background. So the source material probably comes second as a reaction to what I have in front of me.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's jump up to, let's jump up to Mary Ellen. I am just picking you all randomly, but Mary Ellen, if you could sort of tap into the same, thinking about the same series of questions where we're, you know, we're asking you guys to talk about your current direction, since making the work, and is the work that you did in for Full Circle relevant to the current work that you're doing in your studio? Talk to us a little bit about where you're at with your current practice.
Okay, yeah, this piece is basically the way that I am currently working, which I didn't actually talk about that much when I was talking about my piece before. And when I say that I work with photography and dyed fabrics, which could be shibori dyed most of the time, I'm actually developing my photo and scan dyed fabrics through a computer, and I'm working in programs such as Photoshop, and I work really with somewhat of an idea of what I'm doing. However, I really get into these different apps that I'm working with, and there is a lot of spontaneity with it until I find what I really like. And sometimes, like this does have photography in it and scanned cloth. Sometimes I just work with scanned cloth. And once the imagery is the way I want it, then I send it out to be commercially created on either a silk broadcloth or a silk charmeuse, usually in silk. Even when I do art cloths, I'm finding I like the silk broadcloth. And once that happens, many times I do post-production with it. It could be shibori, acid or vat dyes over it by rolling it, and there's a process that I use, and it's considered shibori. And then also I might use inks, or in this case, I used foil, metallic foil, and I used a very thin adhesive called Misty Fuse, and I scatter that, not all at once, but as I work, and I lay that down. I actually use an iron to apply it. And as far as where this piece has taken me with the pandemic, this has actually informed my work, and I've actually been creating quite a bit. The ideas are really flowing, but several of the pieces were informed by this piece. There's several. One's called Global Guardian Angel. Another one, let me think, Turn, Turn, Turn. Another one, Time to Heal. And another one, Global Despair. And in that one, I actually do use the face, but it's a very large piece, and it's sort of in the middle, and it's just kind of hidden there. But I feel very fortunate that I had created this piece, because it's really helped me to move forward during these times when I really want to express myself with my art for the pandemic. I'm inspired to create, you know, with that theme. I did want to say, I'm like Barbara, I love poetry, and many times that helps me with my work. And with that last piece, a quote that I'd used, which is right there, is, "And the ship's wise men will remind you once again that the whole world is watching." And that was by Bob Dylan. But the United States is still considered by some to be a world leader. And that was another reason why I decided to create this, which I forgot to tell you before. So I wanted to add that in. And the world is watching in our country, for good and for bad. And another thing, like I have a tagline that, and I'm reading it, even though it's in my right here. I believe that through creativity, one feeds the soul by empowering one's individual and unique spirit. And yesterday I was at PT for my hand, and I saw a little quote on the wall by Maya Angelou, and it's "Spirit is an invisible force made visible in life." And I just thought that was like so cool for, you know, the fact that I would be doing this talk today, because I really believe that these forceful spirits that are within us are what drive us to create our art. And we're all so individual, and we all create such different art and through such different practices.
Thank you. Wow.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're gonna just move on and have somebody, I mean, yeah, if you guys have anything to say to feed off of each other, but I appreciate this chance for you to have us, you know, talk about something a little bit different and pull some things back into the conversation, because there's a lot of important content to the work that you guys are all doing. So I'm going to jump up to Barbara. If you would address the same questions or feed off of the direction of the folks who have already spoken, but talking about your current practice and, you know, how the work that you did for this might be influencing it or might not, changes you've made. I mean, I think it's interesting even just to hear some of your backgrounds talking about moving from painting. I think Jeannie said this, you know, moving from painting to textiles, and that your painting, you know, I immediately pick up on these things. You said your painting was very realistic, and your textiles are, they're just move into abstraction. You know, you're using color field, you're using texture, you're using text as texture, you're breaking down everything into abstraction, but then you're putting some realistic things back. I mean, it's just, I'm guessing that the shift to textiles, for those of you who may have come from a different field, is really, that alone has been maybe one of the most significant changes. And then these processes of discovery in terms of like getting yourself to do something thematically, or trying to figure out what it is next, or what's going on in the world that's going to impact your work the most. How are you responding to it? Are you responding against it? You know, how are you using your source material? Fascinating. So I know Barbara has left the building. No, there she is.
She's back.
I know you're here. Why don't you talk a little bit about your current direction and how it relates to what we're looking at on the screen, possibly?
Well, I think that all of my work kind of falls under an umbrella. I think of it as the umbrella of the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, which is basically finding beauty in things that are imperfect and maybe on the decaying end of the life cycle and all those kinds of things. And though these pieces may not have been done in the way that I've worked, the work that you have seen, Tracy, they fall within that kind of overarching umbrella. I would say my current work continues to kind of go in two directions. One is smaller pieces, tending toward more hand stitching these days, and then large dimensional pieces that are interpreting nature. And the last few pieces I've done are about, like there's a 4-foot-long log that's created out of fabrics and threads and everything. And it's a 4-foot log that's been split open that I saw in the forest, and it's covered in lichen, and there's leaves stuck inside of it. So it's very dimensional. And that feels very much a part of my tree ring series pieces and all of those nature related ones. This particular piece here, the full circle one on the previous page, or the page after, I can't remember, really got me back into doing more hand stitching that I hadn't been doing much of. And part of that came, we are now, my husband and I, going off to a warmer place each winter, because Chicago's not like Minnesota in that respect, that winter's no fun. So having the hand stitching has led then to doing a whole series that's connected back to nature again for me, called Observations. And it's, I do a lot of work with the Conservation District here in Illinois, in our county, and I, in the last year and a half, have rewalked all of the 27 conservation areas and recording my observations as I walk. And then that work has come back home and been turned into hand-stitched pieces that interpret that. That work, there are 23 of them now done, and they range in size from like 16 by 20 to 24 by 36. And I'm in the process of turning that into another proposal for exhibition. And that's been interesting because it's combining, you know, multiple parts of my life back into something that I think is significant to point out the beauty of these areas, and that it's all out there and people can take advantage of it. And I like the idea of putting together series and turning them into exhibits that kind of hang together. So that's where my work is going. One way this way and one way that way. But connected, still feels very connected.
I think a lot of artists work with multiple ideas, and either the work comes together or you don't force it to come together, and it just sort of remains, the different bodies of work remain peripheral to each other, but there are always connections.
Well, I think they tend to inform one another,
Yeah.
even if they don't seem
Yeah.
connected to the viewer, they inform one another.
Yeah, I think so much of what we all do is internal, and you can't really explain it to anybody anyway. You kind of have to let the work speak for itself, and if it does the job you want, great. But I feel like, you know, when you put your work out there in the world, you're putting it out there for everybody to bring their own information to it. You know, I've always, as an artist, feel fortunate when people have any response to my work. You know, and I don't mean that as a bad thing or a desperate thing. I think it's important, just, you know, when I put my work out there in the world, that's when I'm willing to let it go, and it lives on because of the way other folks interpret it. And so even if they don't see the connections that I see, it doesn't matter, because, you know, I'm learning from the information they bring, which I think is always a really important thing. I'm gonna move on to Judy next. We have Judy and Priscilla left to talk about this, and then I think we'll take some questions towards the end just to see where folks are at with wanting to know more information from all of you. So Judy, can you unmute? I can unmute you, I think. Well. I can ask you to unmute, but I cannot unmute you myself.
All right, how about now?
There you go. You got it.
Okay, great. So if you turn to the other image of mine, I can talk more about where I'm going. So this is 3D, and it's sort of squished into a box because that was our format. But I have really been continuing to work three-dimensionally with some of these same materials and some new materials now. So in this piece, which was the beginning or part of a series, a small series of work that was based on architecture, and not only the quilt patterns, but also to make them a little more architectural. So I just finished a very big piece that was boxes, and the boxes sort of started to feel like my life, in which I was stuck So I think even Barbara may have given my piece the name Stuck in a Box, which I'm sticking to, and it's a very big piece, and it's using these materials. But recently I have gone on to try to explore other ways of making things three-dimensional. So I have been painting canvas with acrylic paint, which I haven't used since I was in college, and I did acrylic painting, and that actually sort of stiffens the canvas. And I just ordered a bunch of even thicker canvas, so we'll see where that goes. But then I'm hand stitching these small elements together, and hopefully they'll be bigger elements. And so that's my new work is continuing to be architectural and not necessarily. So this work in the show is inspired by work that I was doing. I mean, I was put into this box, but then the new work is continuing to push what I can work with. So this is sort of experiments at this point, aside from the big piece I finished.
So I have to say, when I looked at your work during the juring process, I was, it made such sense to me to have these two pieces of the show, because one of them was this sort of perception of dimension, and then the other one, and I have to say, like, looking at some of this work, I was like, how can this be the same person? But, when you look at it as when you look at work as a juror, you're looking at this flattened image on a computer screen, right? So it's all flat anyway, but I knew what I was looking at, and I thought, man, this is like this lush dimensional, I feel these sort of cushy little pouches that are all stuck together. And then the other one was so, the same sort of design format, but completely different point of reference, and now it sounds like you're this new iteration of what you're doing is pushing it in a different direction. And as somebody who I was a former academic, I'm looking at just the multiple possibilities of working with the different materials and with different scales and with the materials together. I could see there just be some crazy mashup down the road where you've got the painted the faux dimension, and you've got this cushion, and you've got this, acrylic painted heavy duty canvas. And so your work had this sense of material exploration to me. And I'm not surprised that that's a direction that you're pushing forward and with. And, a lot of times the ideas behind your work are informed by material and process. And I think that's something, just to sort of throw it out there as somebody who's been in the field of textiles for, I don't know how many years now, 30 and 40 years pushing, I guess, whatever that balance is between material, process, and concept is different for all of us. There are artists that their work, the conceptual basis is the most important thing, and the material and the process have to support that, or they don't care about material, they don't care. And then there are artists who are tied to, I'm going to say, more of the traditions of a practice, of textiles being a practice, not just a modality to, make work. And so it's really interesting to hear everybody's iterative processes. I even like Mary Ellen, to hear that Mary Ellen was like scanning the fabric and then manipulating the fabric, and then she takes the fabric and she sends it out and she has it reprinted, and then she comes back to her and she's working on back into the surface. It's just really amazing how far people push materials, I think, in our field of textiles and fiber art to come up with the pieces, because I think so much of what we do is, as fiber artists, is very labor intensive. And, it's interesting to see like where it goes next, or when something is finished. I think that's always a good question too. It'll be really interesting to see where this goes. And I just want to let everybody who's in the audience know too, we will work in the next couple weeks. So our virtual exhibits will stay on the Textile Center website really forever. We'll try to have the artist list on the website and link to your social media, whether it's a website or an Instagram account, just so people can follow some of what comes next. Because I think, for me, that's research that I do, as a director and a curator and whatever it is. And so just know that we'll be reaching out to you to know what you want us to put out there so that we can continue to follow. We're going to follow up with this question with Priscilla. If Priscilla can unmute.
I should be unmuted.
Yep, there you go. Great. So if you would talk a little bit about your current direction, and then just so everybody knows, there aren't a whole lot of questions in the chat room, but I do have one other question that I want to address to everybody to wrap up everything. So Priscilla, talk to us a little bit about your direction and the ideas that you're working with and continued on with since doing the work for Full Circle.
Okay. So this piece was made last summer. And like Jeanne, I rebelled making such a small piece. My work is generally large, and I think it should be with the themes that I work with. After I finished this, I made 2 more political pieces, one about our Congress and one about something else, and a piece about climate change. And so that was around the beginning of March, which interestingly also was when COVID hit. And I had been thinking for the past 6 months before this time frame that I really needed to take a break from this themed kind of work that I've been working with. And I think when the virus hit, I said, this is the time, just stop this work. And I've had a glorious 6 months, I guess, just following new modes of working and learning from scratch. Not even learning. I mean, I'm just such a beginner at each of them, but I'm really enjoying myself. I'm working with oil and cold wax. I'm working with printmaking. I'm working through a book on making very large expressive drawings. And I am enjoying it all. I think I'm working harder than I ever did, just being in my studio that many hours. One thing I've noticed, I believe I started this little talk 2 or 3 minutes ago saying I had to put these themes away. They won't go away. I mean, I get ideas while I'm working these new techniques, and I have to say, not now. And I write a little note to myself and put it up on my board here. And I also notice while I'm trying these new techniques and making lots and lots of samples, a thought will come into my mind. Oh, I wonder if I could put a piece of silk under that layer of cold wax or something, you know, something like that. What would it look like? And so I'm really trying at this point not to go there, though. I have too much to learn if I want to head in this new direction. So it's really new for me and I'm enjoying it.
Well, and I appreciate what you're saying, because I think as an artist, sometimes it's hard to, and in my world, I oftentimes have to separate the research and development that I want to call it, you know, where you're really just giving yourself time to learn some new studio techniques and explore materials and results without having your mind go to the idea where you want to take that and make work. I mean, I think we all have different ways of doing it. Some people, when they discover something new, they immediately have to utilize it and manifest a finished piece. It sounds to me like you're spending this time sort of exercising your willpower or restraint, not to push yourself to make the finished work, but to really just give yourself the freedom to explore. And I don't know that people out there in the world understand how much willpower it actually takes to continue to have a rigorous studio practice. You know, I sometimes I really have to fight with myself to pick up my work. You know, it's easy to be distracted and do something else, or it's easy to get in the studio and think I'm going to do this, but I end up doing that. And so I think it's just, and the last 3 to 6 months with COVID has really had an impact on everyone in very, very different ways. I mean, some people it's paralyzed them. Some people it's forced them to work. It's given them different reasons to work. It's given them different contexts. They've, there's been so many different approaches. I want to jump into a final, sort of a final question to wrap up the conversation with everybody. And we only have a few minutes left, but we have the time booked on Zoom to go over a little bit. So if folks are willing, we'll just let this come to a natural conclusion. But I'd love to have you, any of you, talk about just your involvement with Art Cloth Network and how that has been significant. And I'm going to say, like, as a support mechanism for your practice, and particularly in a time like this where, here we are at Textile Center. We know we're very much a community center. People have really missed being able to be here in community, working together, meeting up, being with each other. And we've a number of our groups that have convened here have figured out how to meet on Zoom, but I'm just curious for you guys to talk a little bit about what brought you into the network and how the network has supported your practice and how it maybe continues to support it during the pandemic, where we're really all having to function in a very different way. So I'm going to let folks just jump in and not talk over each other, but do any of you have a response? Okay, Barbara.
I think, I've been in it since almost the beginning, and it's been, for me, a real opportunity for learning and growing and having that support of a group that has similar interests, and the fact that we create exhibit opportunities for ourselves, and that helps us to push our work forward. You know every year that you're going to have something that you're working toward. And in an odd, well, maybe not odd, but in a little, I don't know what word I want to use, this year with all the issues and us moving our conference to a virtual environment, which none of us knew if that was going to work at all, it has actually, I think, brought the group closer in some ways, and we've created opportunities for groups within the group to get together via Zoom to learn a new technique or to enhance some aspect of the group, and that has worked remarkably well, I think. So over to somebody else.
I agree with Barbara that the whole concept of these Zoom meetings has really brought us closer together, and there's a life balance group that has started. There's going to be a book club, and as you mentioned, techniques like the faux shape, and it's a whole new brave world for us with this Zoom, and I think it's terrific.
I agree. And it really surprised us. We had an annual meeting of, I think, full membership. I think we had all 27 people attend a Zoom meeting for 3 days. And it was probably one of the tightest meetings we've ever had, and which surprised everybody. And we love getting together, physically getting together, because of course we're in a new city somewhere, annually, and it's loads of fun to have dinners together. But this medium, this format of meeting online has really enriched our group. And especially, we have new members that come every year. We had 2 new members this year who really got to know people in a way that they felt was intimate via this format. So we've been fortunate. And this group, I've been in the group 10 years, and every year I feel like I'm closer and closer to the members, and they've become dear friends, and we learn from each other and we grow. So I feel pretty blessed to be part of the group. Anybody else?
I would just add, I think the group is really special because not only do we each individually learn and grow from it, but I think we really support each other and relish when someone else gets an award or first place or whatever. It's a really close group. We're very lucky.
Did we lose?
Judy?
I was wondering if Judy had it. I don't
Yeah,
know where.
Tracy's muted and she's
Oh.
talking.
That's my fault. Here I am
There you
talking,
go.
and I'm on.
Okay, what I was going to say is that the Art Cloth Network, which I've probably been a member of for maybe 15 or more years, it's a big part of my life. The friendships that I've made and the inspiration that I've got and the push to keep working has just been, a really important part of all of those years. And I agree with the others that the Zoom meetings that we've been having with smaller groups, I feel like I'm even getting to know people in a different way, in a better way. Not better, but definitely a different way, and more frequent contact with people. So
I'm inspired to hear you guys talking like that, because I know for a fact that some of our guilds and other organizations that I'm involved with, having the Zoom meeting, we talk about all the possible negative impacts of digital relationships, but there's something that it does for people who are willing to engage that really does help us stay connected. 6 months ago, we would have never imagined that we would be doing this, but I had to teach a hand construction class this spring at one of our local colleges, and I thought, how am I going to do this? And the students actually really, they looked forward to the time that we spent together every week, and they looked forward to having these individual meetings with me. And there was something that was actually almost more comfortable about it, because you're in this sort of fixed environment behind you, if you're just sitting in front of a screen, so the distractions aren't really there. And I think people the people I've been dealing with have been very, very thoughtful. I think you guys have been extremely thoughtful about and prepared with being able to talk about your work and just coming together and just being open to talking about process and your ideas and, the significance of the group. And so, challenge is on to the next group on August 20th. There will be 5 more members of the Art Cloth Network joining us for another Art Speaks Lunchtime part of this series. And we're actually gonna wrap up, unless anybody else has anything last to say. We're just gonna encourage everybody that's on to take a look at the virtual exhibit. It's textilecentermn.org, and our virtual exhibitions are featured in the banner at the top of our homepage on the website, but they're also under the See Art. And you guys can, folks can take a look at the Full Circle catalog. And if you're here in Minnesota, give us a call or get online and make an appointment and come down and see us, because we're open. We have I think excellent safety protocols in place for social distancing, mask wearing, sanitizing, all that. And it's been really wonderful to have people here in the building being able to see the artwork, which is, thank you all for sending it. It's just a really amazing array. So
Well,
Thank you, Tracy, for this opportunity.
you are
It's been
also
great.
welcome. Thanks.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Tracy, it's Jeanne here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a little PR, just a little PR. Our call for new members, it will be, we're open for a call for new members September 1st through October 31st. If you want more information, you can go to the artclothnetwork.com and click on join us. There'll be information and someone you can contact for more information.
Oh, perfect.
There you go. I just didn't want to forget.
Thank you so much. And we can add that to our newsletter as well. That goes out to 8,000 or 9,000 people every other week. I think it would be it's great. Thank you for supporting us, and it's been a pleasure supporting you. And we look forward to having you guys join as audience members in a couple weeks when you're some of your other colleagues.
Yeah,
It'll be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, you guys too.